Welcome to this bonus segment of episode 12. Earlier on, when we filmed episode 12, there was a significant debate between the two gentlemen about cronyism versus progressive privatization. We're going to allow them to spend a few minutes exploring the issue further and see if we are any further enlightened when we get to the end of this.
So I'll ask the question to Tinashe. Why do you think that this partial privatization, because they didn't sell all of it, of Fidelity printers, is crony capitalism?
I have a problem with...
Sorry, what is crony capitalism?
Yeah, I was about to say that I actually have a problem with what you're terming crony capitalism. Let's take the word capitalism away from it, and let's call it cronyism. Can we agree that even under communism or socialism, that you do have a tendering process, that governments do put out tenders and private individuals and private companies actually supply those tenders and supply those products and services?
In a communist country?
In a communist country.
Like China under Mao?
Yeah, even under China under Mao, or under Stalin, Russia under Stalin.
But what's the? Make your point.
Well, yeah, no. In this particular show, George, you don't get to write short. Yeah, I can I can say whatever I want to say, and it's important that we define these terms. There's no capitalism, yeah, because capitalism, the core issue about capitalism is having as many competitors or as many companies as possible in the marketplace. So when you have one individual, one company in the marketplace, that is not capitalism. Why I use the term cronyism? Because cronyism can still happen under socialism or under communism, right? Cronyism is choosing a particular firm or a particular company to be the provider, to be the sole provider of a particular thing. And there's some level of collusion between the business and the state that's in power. So there are two things that I would want to see if I talk of capitalism, or if I talk of free market, or if I talk of markets generally. The first thing is, has the regulation changed? So if we look at Fidelity, the regulation has not changed. What has just happened is government has taken away its shareholding and has reduced its shareholding to 40%, but we still have one sole producer of gold refinery in Zimbabwe. And I would have a problem with that, because I think that what should have happened is they should have just deregulated the industry, and government could form their own company. That would have been very fine, but then allowed as many market players as possible. Now, it's cronyism. Why we term it cronyism? It's cronyism because they started with the latter. So they started with a chosen particular company and association with a particular company. So they've blocked every other market player from actually entering the marketplace, right? So that is cronyism. It's not capitalism, because the key tenet of capitalism is we must have as many players as possible. So I would put it across.
Do try and leave some time for Faro in the segment, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe you can reply.
Yeah, okay. So I think you're conflating issues.
Okay.
If you look at the South African Reserve Bank, it's privately held, right? There is only one South African Reserve Bank. They have a monopoly. If you look at the US Federal Reserve, it's privately held. There's only one Federal Reserve. They have a monopoly. Okay. Now, so speaking to those two examples, right? Do you think South Africa would be better off if the government owned the Reserve Bank? Do you think the US would be better off if the government owned the Fed?
You want me to answer now?
Yes.
Okay. So just because it happens in South Africa or in the US doesn't mean that that's the proper way of going about it. So let's look at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve's monopoly started in 1913, right? That's just about 100 years. Are you saying that there was no free banking? There were numerous banks that could issue currency before that?
They were. Yeah.
Right? And the industrialization of America happened when you had free banking principles. So it's a bad idea to actually have the Federal Reserve, right? And there's no one who believes in free markets who will then also agree to a monopoly position in the issuing of currency. There's no one who would.
Yeah. So I agree with you there. I agree with you.
So
there.
let's be very
but
clear.
I agree with you there. But what I'm saying is, if you're going to have a monopoly, right, like the Fed or the South African Reserve Bank or Fidelity Printers, is as a capitalist, do you think we're better off with that monopoly controlled 100% by government or by private players? What do you think is better?
So you said as a capitalist. As a capitalist, I would not even consider that. And I think earlier I made the...
How does this guy order a meal on a plane? Beef or chicken? No.
I would not even consider it.
If you're Jewish, what would you consider?
When your only option is beef or chicken, what do you say?
I'm Jewish.
So you don't eat?
No, but they eat both chicken and
kosher.
beef.
Unless it's kosher, I'm not going to eat.
Okay.
Okay, that's another rabbit hole. But
So let's be very clear. So when you call yourself a capitalist, and I think you're confusing and conflating the matter here. When you call yourself a capitalist, how can you call yourself a capitalist or believe in capitalism or believe in markets or even believe in free markets, and then there's a regulated monopoly, and you still think that's okay?
No,
Because we're not
puritanical.
we're not puritanical about our views.
We don't live in heaven. We live here on earth, as you keep reminding us. So we live. So when we interface with reality, there's a spectrum, right? There's the really bad ideas and things that don't work, and then there's really great ideas and things that work fantastically. Yeah, and so we moved from a place where we had a monopoly, right, a state monopoly, in which this company was 100% owned by the state. Yeah, and yes, it's bad to have such a monopoly that's a regulated monopoly, and I agree with you 100% as far as that is concerned. Now we've moved from this particular monopoly being 100% owned by the government to being 60% owned by private players. To me, that's progress. I didn't say it's ideal. I didn't say it's perfect. I didn't say that's the way the world should be. I'm simply saying that when I look at the world post this transaction and before this transaction, I think it's better.
Okay, so there's a word you avoided. So in the way you've explained it, so we've moved from a place where the central bank was in total control to a place where you have a private player.
Mm-hmm.
But a word enters the equation, which is cronyism. Why are we terming it cronyism? We're terming it cronyism.
But you've told us this already.
And I think as a 6-year-old on this show, I understand cronyism. I think I get it.
So how is that in any way better?
Because it's not it's like hypothetically, right? Let's say
Okay,
something is 100% evil, right? And then we move down a notch and we're now at 40% evil. Are we not better off?
As long, and this is what I've continuously say, as long as you are arguing about which type of communism is better between Russian and Chinese, to me, as far as I'm concerned, they're all
But if
bad.
you were given a choice, right? If you were given a choice, hear me out. Let me finish. If you were given a choice, knowing everything that you know about Stalinist Soviet Union and Maoist China, right? And you could have been born in China under Mao during some of his fantastic revolutions, right? Or you could have been born in the Soviet Union under Stalin. With the data that you have, you would make a choice, right? You wouldn't be sitting there saying, "Well, I'd be agnostic. I don't care.
No.
It's equally bad."
No,
you wouldn't make a choice based on the data.
Damned. You're equally damned. You're equally damned.
Well, gentlemen, I think we're not going to...
I think let's be very clear. Cronyism. Okay, so let me put it in another way. Suppose the state puts out a tender, right, for a particular product. And it puts out this tender, and it's still the gatekeeper. And the gatekeeper colludes with whoever wins the tender. Is that in any way better if that particular individual is providing the services and not
So this is
the
where you and me
state?
differ because
And not the state.
because you're
Because
being
the state can still provide.
you're being puritanical.
I'm
You're
actually
saying
not.
it's like you have two bad people. One wants to chop off your left leg. The other one wants to chop off both your left and right leg. It's bad that someone wants to chop off any of your legs, right?
You
but,
think?
but the guy who wants to chop off both of your legs is certainly worse than the guy who just wants to chop off one.
Okay, so to your example, the state providing the product. So let's take Cuba. Let's take Cuba as an example, which is a socialist
I
state.
like Cuba.
Yeah, it's a socialist
They
state,
make
right?
phenomenal cigars.
Yeah, let's
And rum.
take
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
too.
um,
Okay,
and
he wouldn't know.
sugarcane. Well, I'd know
all
a lot
sugar
more
cane's
about
the- all
the
sugar cane's the same,
sugarcane
really.
And the tourists.
Do you like sugarcane?
Oh, yeah, actually. But let's take Cuba for example. So it's a socialist state, and whatever it provides, whether it says we're going to provide education, they tend to do it in a more efficient way. So there's no cronyism, or there's less cronyism in the Cuban state. When you look at Zimbabwe, suppose Fidelity was operating under a Cuban type of process, it might turn out that it will be more efficient than when you introduce a third party where there is cronyism, where there is clear
And
collusion,
I love this.
Now,
I love this.
now
I
you're
love
actually
this.
making now you're actually making a point.
where there is clear collusion between the guy who's winning the tender, right? The guy who's winning the company and the monopoly. So it's actually worse off. So
I
to your
love
example,
this. I love this.
To your example,
You're finally
getting
making
one-
sense.
Well, that's exactly what I've been saying all along.
No,
but
it's not.
You guys,
This is how
no,
we're
no, no,
friends.
because
Once
you
in a
guys
while,
are-
he actually makes sense.
you guys don't understand. And that's
Clearly.
why, and that's why I kept on insisting that
Okay,
No, finish your
finish
example. Finish your example because I like your example.
yes. So my example is this: that first of all, if the state was actually efficient, if Fidelity was actually efficient, there was no need. So we have operated under a Fidelity regime where we had 33 tons of gold in this country, right? And we could have been more,
Yeah.
right? And no one was complaining, right? But I have a problem now. If you now have private players, chosen private players, right?
But you don't
haven't
know that
opened up-
they're chosen. You're speculating.
No, they've actually said it. They said these 10 producers, and they gave the requirements of who will participate.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
So you guys were you're debating an issue that you do not have
Sufficient
literature,
color.
sufficient color to.
No, give us.
Wow, this is
why we have drinks with you.
This is so disappointing. But that's besides the point. The point is, it's cronyism.
I agree with that.
It's cronyism when you've chosen, you've preferred particular individuals, and you've given this to particular individuals, no matter what it is. Because what you're supposed to do, the big
okay.
problem.
Okay,
Let me ask you a question.
Producer says we've got 2 minutes.
Let me ask you a question.
So you got a minute?
Yeah.
And then he's got a minute.
I want to ask him a question because I love that he, as atrocious as the Cuban communist system is, I like
Socialist.
that, socialist, communist, tomato. As atrocious as that regime is, right? He is alive to how efficient they are about educating the people, about healthcare, about they probably have trains that run on time.
They've got their own vaccine.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. But it's still socialism/communism, and we should really hold our noses when we talk about them. Now, is there any part of the way things work in this part of the world that you can say, well, you know what, generally our government is inefficient, but this part of government is as efficient as the Cuban government?
That's a very good question, and it comes back to my point, because when I say cronyism,
Guys, you're gonna get me fired.
yeah.
So we've got to wind this up.
Okay, all right, okay. The biggest problem in Africa is the cronyism. So if you add cronyism and socialism, what you get is the disaster that we have in Africa. Whereas in Cuba, you have less the cronyism, right? So my biggest problem in Africa is the cronyism and the socialism. So you can't take away one. So if you take away the cronyism, you still have the socialism. So it's still problematic. If you take away the cronyism, you still have socialism. You're not going anywhere. That's what we learned from Cuba. You don't go anywhere.
You've got two terminal illnesses.
So unfortunately,
Sorry, I'm going to get fired now. So we've got to really wind this up. But I think you've made your point, and I think you guys have built some sort of consensus towards the point. But I think something that perhaps you can think about for a future bonus segment, because you touched on Africa and cronyism and socialism. As you're saying that, I thought about the whole of the Latin world, and they have a big cronyism problem.
Absolutely.
And yet, from your contribution, Cuba stands out as an exception.
Yes.
So maybe some homework that you guys can do is think about how did Cuba break away from that cronyism legacy of the Latin world?
Oh, thank goodness. I thought you were about to say, how can we be more like Cuba?
But I
don't want to be more like Cuba.
But I think
about George is it actually appeals to George.
I think we must round it up here.
This is a closet communist talking.
Rufaro and I have some work to do. And everybody else, please.
And we're not going to give Tinashe more coffee.
Yeah, I think I'm done. I'm done for the evening.
No more coffee for you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend.